I love sci-fi projects like this Altered Carbon, Blade Runner, and it comes to us from the director of Train to Busan. Is it good? Well, what is up, Netflix fans? Welcome back to the channel. Brand new sci-fi movie on the platform, only an hour and 40 minutes. This is Jung-yi. We are going to talk about it right now. Earth has been devastated by drastic climate change, and humankind migrates to new shelters in outer space. The civil war that occurs there continues on for decades, and Yun Jung-yi becomes a legendary mercenary and military strategist with countless victories to her name. But one failed mission puts her in a bad state, so a military AI development company attempts to create the ultimate combat warrior by cloning her brain. I just felt like I needed to say it like that. This is rated TV 14 for violence and gore. Obviously, mild profanity, a bit of nudity, some frightening and intense scenes, but it definitely feels like these types of sci-fi movies that we've seen before. And I mentioned Blade Runner at the beginning and Altered Carbon, and I could go on with countless sci-fi films that have this dark tone to them, a futuristic setting, but also something that takes advantage of what you could present to us visually. And thankfully, Jung-yi at least has some really nice visuals in here. We'll talk about the CGI here in a bit, but in terms of the fight scenes, the action sequences, some of the more tender and emotional moments when they really focus on the color grading of that specific scene, it works extremely well. Along with the projects I mentioned, AI, Artificial Intelligence, the Steven Spielberg movie, as well as a bit of Alita Battle Angel. Now, it takes it in an entirely different direction than I expected, and I'm open to something like that. I thought this was going to be more of an action-heavy type of movie. We get those sequences. They look good for the most part, but the film, really the entirety of the second act, doesn't opt to go that direction. So what could have been an Alita Battle Angel type of movie turned into something that tried to be a bit more emotional. Did it accomplish that task? Well, first of all, I want to talk about the cast. One of the actresses here, Kang Soo-youn, actually lost her life last year, so it was awful to think about that while watching this, but the performance there is good. Jung-yi is obviously the focus here, but we're dealing with this scientist's daughter who is looking after her mother's brain, and there is a great mother-daughter relationship story in here somewhere that they don't quite explore to build up that relationship, but we do get a lot of the aftermath, and we do take a look at the questions that are being posed here. One that's asked one of the characters at the beginning is, how do you feel about taking your brain and allowing us to either use it for science, to clone you in a way to where you don't necessarily have rights anymore? You could pay a bit more. There's a plan A, B, and C to get to the point to where you do have all of your rights and you do have the ability to feel like a human once again, right? There are so many things that play at the beginning. I'm sitting back going, well, this is not what I expected. I mean, we get that Blade Runner moment where she's answering very specific questions. We're kind of exploring her mind, but I didn't really understand the type of story that we were in for until we started to get it. And for that, I was appreciative that it tried to go down a different and more distinct path, that instead of focusing so heavily on the action sequences after the first act, it was more of an exploration of these characters. The problem is with that, you have to have the proper build-up and emotional attachment for the characters that you're dealing with. And I don't think this movie did a good job of building up those characters, allowing us to have an emotional attachment to them, and some of the characters, they are just so straight-faced, and they really struggle showing emotion when the movie calls for it. Now, you do have a handful of supporting players here, one in particular that just shows too much emotion. I mean, it took away from the scenes that required you to feel a certain way, but I'm like, I can't take the wackiness and the zaniness of this one guy when I'm really supposed to be feeling something in this moment. And every time he was on screen, I'm just like, I'm not enjoying this. And obviously Yun Seo-hyun brought us Train to Busan, but also brought us Peninsula, which was a massive step down from that film, and I really struggle with the visual effects there. Now you look at this movie, the way that it's presented and the overall look, I think is really good. I don't want to say they copied the Blade Runner formula, but it is the formula of beautifully lit backgrounds, the neon lighting that comes into play. It's that futuristic setting. We're dealing with this world that is so much different than our own, and the rules of this world, the way that they operate is interesting enough, but all of that is elevated by the visuals, other than a few scenes to where they didn't quite work as well as they wanted to. I could also look at I, Robot. Remember that movie with Will Smith, especially that scene when all of the robots are kind of lined up? There is a scene very reminiscent to that does escalate and turn into an action-heavy scene in this movie. But that moment also reminded me of I, Robot visually, and I'm like, well, that came out in 2004. This came out in 2023. Now, obviously, this one looks better, but there were sequences where the CGI just did not live up to what it should have been in that moment. And there are numerous scenes like that. Now, thankfully, the action, like I said, isn't heavily focused on, but I do like the way those action sequences were laid out, the way that they were built up, and the massive scale of some of these sequences, the huge set pieces in the background. I thought that looked really cool. I just like the design of everything. Now, it's funny because this movie is dealing with war, but the war is happening in the background, and the structure of the plot that we get, at least what we're focused on, is much more specific and strategic, and focusing on the rights of clones, and really what it means to be human, how humanity is not just something you can take and manipulate and attempt to get right artificially. It's not something you can manufacture, and that is a very prominent plot point that I feel like would have hit me even more if I would have felt the emotional attachment to our main characters. And again, kind of stops me from feeling that attachment, but there's something the way the screenplay was presented here that just did not give me that emotional connection that I required. So in the scenes where I'm really supposed to be feeling something, I'm more so just appreciative of the message that they're going for. And this overarching plot is something we have seen countless times before. It all comes down to execution here, and that's really what I struggle with in this movie. So it's one of those movies you watch, you appreciate what the director's going for. If you like this genre and really the atmosphere created in a film like this, you may appreciate it more than me, but again, I felt an emotional detachment. There's one character I just thought was way too over the top, and overall, it just didn't quite land. So before I give you my score, what is your favorite movie in this genre? And if you enjoyed this video and you want to drop a like, that would be swell. The overall concept and cyberpunk atmosphere works wonders, but the execution isn't quite there. There is a lot of emotion required to get the intended impact, but the script doesn't quite allow it to work, and that's why I'm going a 48% with my score. I wanted to enjoy it more, but there are elements I could see why people could enjoy this movie, but it's definitely one of those Netflix movies I watch, and I probably won't remember here in about a week. So thanks again for watching. See you soon.